The sun had barely risen over Lagos when Anthony Joshua's world, and the world of those who looked up to him, changed forever. In the blink of an eye, a day that seemed ordinary became a nightmare. How could a man who had conquered every opponent in the ring, who had stared death and violence in the face for millions of fans, suddenly find himself fighting a battle he could not control? It was supposed to be a routine drive along the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, a road Anthony had traveled countless times. Yet, in those few seconds before impact, destiny had other plans. Footage that quickly circulated online captured a scene no one expected. Anthony Joshua, the indomitable former heavyweight world champion, shirtless, bloodied, glass embedded in his skin, sitting in the twisted wreckage of his SUV. His eyes, wide and dazed, told a story that words alone could not convey. The video froze a moment in time that would haunt millions, the sudden, shocking fragility of a man many had believed invincible. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. What went wrong? Why did this happen? And perhaps the most chilling question, could Anthony survive? Reports emerged almost immediately. The official narrative suggested minor injuries, a hospital visit, and an SUV that had collided with a stationary truck on the side of the expressway. But if you looked closely at the footage, at the way his hands trembled and his chest heaved, it was clear that the reality might be far more complicated, far more frightening than what was being reported. To understand the gravity of this event, we need to go beyond the headlines. Anthony Joshua is not just a boxer. He is a symbol of triumph, of relentless determination, of resilience. From the streets of Watford, England, to the global stage, he became a figure who embodied strength. And yet, here he was, stripped of armor not by an opponent, but by the randomness of life itself. The crash, the chaos, the fear, it reminded everyone that even giants are not immune to fate's unpredictable cruelty. The day started like any other. The morning air was thick with humidity, a typical Lagos dawn. Joshua was traveling in a convoy, a common precaution for someone of his stature. He sat behind the driver in a sleek SUV, a Lexus, accompanied by another passenger. Ahead, a stationary truck waited innocently at the side of the expressway. Nothing unusual about it, except for what was about to unfold. Minutes later, the SUV would lose control during an overtaking maneuver, sending it smashing violently into the truck. The force of the impact shattered glass, twisted metal, and upended lives in a heartbeat. Emergency services were swift to arrive, but the scene was chaotic. 5 men were involved in the collision, according to Nigerian road safety officials. 2 would not survive. Joshua, despite the public's initial belief that he was only lightly hurt, was dazed and disoriented, his body bearing evidence of the crash far beyond the minor injuries reported. Witnesses described a man who, despite his legendary courage in the ring, now looked vulnerable, human in a way that no fight ever forced him to be. But this story isn't just about a car crash. It's about a collision of circumstances, of human error and fatal timing. Reports hinted that the SUV may have been traveling beyond the legally prescribed speed limit, a detail that, while seemingly minor, carried devastating consequences. Every second mattered. Every decision on that highway was magnified into a life-or-death scenario. Could this have been avoided? Were their warnings ignored? And the most pressing question for everyone watching, did Joshua realize how dire his situation was before the impact? The human response to this tragedy is telling. Within minutes, social media exploded. Fans, journalists, friends, and family members shared their shock, disbelief, and concern. Questions flew faster than answers. How badly was he hurt? Would he fight again? And amidst the chaos, one phrase began circulating, words attributed directly to Joshua himself. "I will not survive." A statement that sent shivers down the spine of anyone who heard it. A declaration that even the strongest among us sometimes confront moments when survival is uncertain. Imagine the gravity of that moment. A man who had faced some of the most brutal athletes on the planet, who had endured rounds where every punch threatened permanent damage, now confronting vulnerability not in a ring, but on a highway. The irony is stark and bitter. How does a champion cope with the fact that skill, power, and experience mean nothing when life's hazards appear in the most ordinary form. A parked truck, a wet road, a miscalculated maneuver. And yet, even in that despair, there is a story unfolding. A story that goes beyond injury and fear. It is about resilience, human spirit, and the ripple effects of tragedy. The crash was not just a physical event. It was a narrative filled with questions of accountability, fate, and consequence. How did his security detail respond? What were the reactions of those traveling with him? And what of the 2 lives lost in the crash? Their stories are interwoven with Joshua's in a way that underscores the fragility of life. For millions of fans worldwide, Anthony Joshua represents invincibility, discipline, and strength. And that perception makes this event even more jarring. To see a hero reduced to fear and uncertainty strikes a chord in all of us. It is a reminder that no matter how powerful, how prepared, or how cautious, everyone is subject to life's unpredictability. It forces reflection. How would we act if faced with sudden, uncontrollable danger? Would courage be enough, or would the human body and spirit falter under pressure? Even as authorities worked to reconstruct the crash, new questions arose. Investigators pointed to speed, reckless driving, and a moment of misjudgment. Yet eyewitness accounts hinted at contradictions. Some said the SUV appeared stable moments before the collision, others swore it swerved without warning. These conflicting narratives only deepen the mystery and suspense. For a man used to controlling every outcome in the ring, losing control on a public highway must have been a surreal, almost unbearable experience. What made this crash particularly haunting was the immediacy of its impact. In one instant, life continued as usual. In the next, everything was changed. The debris, the sirens, the chaotic scramble to safety, all of it created a tableau of human vulnerability. And in the center of it all sat Anthony Joshua, staring at the wreckage around him, facing the harshest reality he had ever encountered. Survival is never guaranteed. Yet the story does not end with fear. There is tension, hope, and the foreshadowing of resilience. Joshua's next actions, how he responded, how he was treated, how he faced the aftermath, would shape not only his personal journey, but also the narrative that fans and the world would come to know. Each moment after the crash is loaded with suspense. Would he survive? How serious were the injuries really? And what would this mean for his family, his career, and his legacy? This introduction is just the beginning. What came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The crash was only the first chapter in a story filled with pain, revelation, and resilience. In the moments after the impact, every decision, every reaction, and every heartbeat would be amplified, setting the stage for a journey that blends tragedy, heroism, and the unpredictable twists of life itself. And yet, as shocking as the crash footage was, there remained details that would only emerge later. Secrets captured in fleeting glances, in statements whispered to officials, and in the quiet reactions of those who survived. These are the moments that will define this story, moments that will force fans, journalists, and even casual observers to confront the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the strongest among us are also the most exposed, and survival is never guaranteed, no matter how mighty the fighter. What does it feel like to face a day that starts ordinary and ends catastrophic? For Anthony Joshua, December 30th began like any other morning, yet it would become a day etched in history for reasons no one could have predicted. How could a man who had conquered the world in the ring, who had stared down giants and walked away victorious, suddenly find himself in a fight he couldn't win? The Lagos-Ibadan Expressway is no stranger to accidents. It's a road known for high speeds, heavy traffic, and sudden hazards. But Anthony Joshua, a man used to calculated risks, had traveled this route countless times. He knew the bends, the stretches, the subtle imperfections of the asphalt. Yet familiarity can sometimes breed danger rather than safety. How often do we underestimate ordinary risks because we think we know them too well? Joshua was traveling in a convoy, a precautionary measure, a routine protocol for someone of his stature. His SUV, a sleek Lexus, carried him and another passenger, while his security detail followed closely behind in separate vehicles. From the outside, it might have looked like a typical VIP movement, but inside, the atmosphere was anything but ordinary. Reports suggest that Joshua was quiet that morning, perhaps reflective, perhaps aware of the subtle tension that often accompanies travel in Nigeria's congested highways. Minutes before the crash, everything seemed deceptively normal. The sky was overcast, Lagos's early morning haze creating a muted backdrop. Drivers navigated with practiced precision, honking, weaving, overtaking in calculated bursts. Joshua's SUV moved with confidence, cutting through the lanes. But there's a cruel unpredictability on these roads. One wrong maneuver, one momentary lapse, and catastrophe is unleashed. The stationary truck that would become the focal point of this tragedy sat innocently at the roadside. Perhaps the driver had stopped for a short break, perhaps for repairs. The reason was irrelevant now. For Anthony Joshua and the occupants of his SUV, it became an immovable obstacle, the pivot around which fate would swing. Eyewitnesses later recalled seeing the SUV approach at a high speed. Some claimed it appeared stable. Others swore it swerved slightly before the collision. Contradictions like these are common in moments of chaos, yet each observation provides a piece of the puzzle. How fast was the SUV going? Were the passengers aware of the looming danger? And most importantly, did Joshua himself sense the impending disaster in the few seconds before impact? In those fleeting moments, time behaves strangely. Seconds stretch, perceptions warp, and decisions, however automatic, carry consequences far beyond what anyone can predict. The SUV attempted an overtaking maneuver, a calculated risk that would prove fatal. It's a move that Joshua, a man trained to assess risk constantly, may have instinctively judged safe. Yet physics and fate were about to intervene in a way that even the strongest instincts could not counteract. The impact itself was sudden and brutal. Metal crumpled, glass shattered, and the SUV's frame contorted violently against the stationary truck. The sound, a cacophony of tearing metal, snapping plastic, and human panic, echoed along the highway. Witnesses described a scene that was almost surreal, like watching a disaster in slow motion, yet powerless to intervene. Inside the SUV, Anthony Joshua's world became a blur. The force of the crash threw him forward, glass cutting into skin, the seatbelt constraining his movements but unable to prevent every injury. His mind raced, confusion, shock, fear, disbelief. The man who had once stared down some of the most dangerous punches in the world now faced a moment of vulnerability that no amount of training could prepare him for. Outside, the chaos was immediate. Traffic slowed, honking and shouting filled the air, and bystanders ran toward the wreckage. Emergency services were called, but in those first minutes, every second felt like an eternity. Joshua's security detail responded as trained, yet even their presence could not reverse the suddenness of the calamity. Lives had already been altered irrevocably. What makes this story particularly gripping is not just the crash itself, but the human response in those moments. Anthony Joshua, dazed and bleeding, was not just a celebrity or a sports icon. He was a man confronting mortality, facing a vulnerability rarely shown in public. Reports suggest he uttered words that would send chills down anyone's spine. "I will not survive." Whether said in shock, fear, or a moment of brutal honesty, the statement reflects the intense reality of human fragility, even for the seemingly invincible. For those traveling with him, the moments were terrifying. The other passenger, though less visible in footage, experienced the impact's full force. Security personnel, trained for high-stress situations, had to navigate the wreckage, assist victims, and maintain order while grappling with the emotional weight of seeing a world champion in peril. And then there were the fatalities. 2 lives lost in an instant. People who, by circumstance, became part of this tragedy. Their deaths add a layer of sorrow and gravity, reminding everyone watching that this is not a story of a single individual, but a human event with consequences that ripple outward. Every collision has a story behind it. Every life lost carries echoes of what might have been, and in this instance, the intersection of speed, timing, and human judgment created irreversible consequences. But amid the chaos, small details begin to emerge, pieces of a puzzle that hint at something more complex than a simple accident. Was the speed of the SUV truly beyond legal limits, or did the circumstances of the road force a miscalculation? Did distraction, fatigue, or even instinctive overconfidence play a role? And what of the stationary truck? Were there signals or precautions that could have prevented this outcome? Questions like these fuel speculation and tension, keeping the story alive in the minds of those who follow it closely. Joshua's reaction after the impact provides another layer of intrigue. Footage shows him shirtless, dazed, glass embedded in his skin, sitting in the wreckage. Then, in a separate vehicle, he is seen speaking to officials, his voice calm yet tinged with fear. This juxtaposition, vulnerability and composure, mirrors the contradiction inherent in his persona. The ultimate fighter reduced to a passenger in a moment of uncontrollable danger. The narrative of the day does not end with the crash. What followed, the response of officials, the statements to the press, and the immediate social media reaction, all contributed to a drama that extended far beyond the highway. Nigerians, fans worldwide, and the global boxing community were all suddenly drawn into a story of suspense, fear, and uncertainty. And in those moments, a story begins to form. One that combines physical danger, emotional intensity, and the inexorable randomness of life. For Anthony Joshua, a man accustomed to controlling every outcome inside the ring, the inability to control these events must have been profoundly unsettling. Every champion believes in preparation, strategy, and instinct. Here, preparation could not shield him. Strategy could not avert disaster. Instinct alone was not enough. The stage was set for a deeper exploration of the aftermath. The injuries, the family's response, the implications for his career, and the social and emotional impact on those who loved him and followed him. Each of these elements adds layers of suspense, emotion, and reflection. And as the day unfolded, each second carried the weight of consequences that could not be undone. The minutes after the crash were a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and adrenaline. Imagine sitting in a vehicle, the air thick with the smell of smoke, gasoline, and blood. Every sound, the shrill scream of brakes, the shattering glass, the shouts of bystanders, seared itself into memory. For Anthony Joshua, each heartbeat was amplified, each breath a reminder that survival was not guaranteed. Rescue crews arrived, sirens blaring, flashing lights cutting through the early morning haze. They had seen crashes before, but there was something about this scene that drew attention beyond the usual, a global icon trapped amid chaos. Their training kicked in immediately, but the human element remained undeniable. Joshua was conscious, but disoriented, his body showing signs of trauma. Minor injuries, the initial report said, but anyone who looked closely could see the truth. His bruises, the cuts, the glass embedded in his skin. These were marks of a collision that could have easily ended his life. The two men who did not survive were quickly transported from the scene, but their deaths hung over the event like a dark shadow. Every eyewitness, every official, every member of Joshua's convoy would carry the memory of those lives lost. The road that morning had claimed more than a celebrity. It had taken innocent lives, leaving a scar on everyone connected to the crash. And that is one of the cruel realities of accidents like this. It is never only the famous or the strong who are affected. Every tragedy ripples outward. As Joshua was lifted into the secondary vehicle to be transported to the hospital, his demeanor betrayed a mix of fear and shock. Reports suggest he was speaking to officials, explaining what had happened, but the words were fragmented, punctuated by the occasional groan of pain. A man who had delivered knockout blows to opponents now had to face a force he could not control. He could not punch, kick, or maneuver his way out. The fight was no longer in his hands. Eyewitnesses recalled him murmuring something chilling, words that would echo across social media and news outlets. "I will not survive." For fans accustomed to seeing Joshua emerge victorious, these words struck with a stark, almost unbearable intensity. How do you process hearing a hero, a man who has conquered the impossible, express vulnerability so openly? It is a moment that blurs the line between celebrity and humanity, a reminder that no one is untouchable. Meanwhile, the traffic on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway was in chaos. Drivers slowed, swerved, or stopped entirely, creating a secondary hazard as emergency services attempted to clear the scene. Some bystanders recorded videos on their phones, capturing the rawness of the moment, footage that would later circulate online, adding to the storm of speculation and concern. Each frame of video, each captured expression, told a story far more powerful than any written report. The fragility of human life, the suddenness of tragedy, and the vulnerability of even the mightiest individuals. Inside the hospital, the assessment continued. Medical staff worked efficiently, yet the reports remained conflicting. Official statements suggested minor injuries, but insiders hinted at something more serious. Broken bones? Concussions? Soft tissue injuries? Perhaps all of the above. The truth was layered, complex, and deliberately opaque. In situations involving high-profile individuals, the initial narrative often minimizes the severity, partly to protect privacy and partly to manage public perception. But the eyes tell the truth. And Joshua's eyes, when seen in early footage, reflected a storm of pain, fear, and disbelief that words could not contain. Family members were contacted immediately, their journey to the scene fraught with anxiety. The mother, father, and brother of Anthony Joshua were thrown into a crucible of emotion. Fear for his life, grief for the lost passengers, and a desperate need for information in a rapidly changing scenario. One can only imagine the whirlwind of calls, frantic messages, and racing thoughts that filled their morning. How do you process the possibility of losing a son, a brother, a loved one, even temporarily? The emotional tension added another layer to the unfolding drama, heightening the stakes beyond what any public observer could see. Meanwhile, journalists began arriving, capturing interviews with onlookers, eyewitnesses, and officials. Every word, every gesture was scrutinized. The media narrative began to shape public perception. Anthony Joshua had been in a crash. There were injuries, but nothing life-threatening. Yet the footage told another story. Fans watching from around the world saw the same dissonance we saw, the gap between official reports and the raw visual truth. And this gap, this contradiction, would fuel curiosity, concern, and speculation for days to come. The SUV itself was a focal point for investigation. How had it lost control? Could speed have been a factor? Authorities noted the vehicle may have been traveling beyond the legally prescribed speed limit. This detail, seemingly minor in a broader narrative, carried enormous implications. Each decision, acceleration, lane change, reaction time, compounded the likelihood of disaster. It's a stark reminder that on the highway, unlike in the boxing ring, experience and strength can only go so far. Physics and chance often win. As hours passed, questions multiplied. Who was responsible for the crash? Was it a simple accident, or was human error a critical factor? What role did the driver, the convoy, and external conditions play? And how did Joshua, a man used to control, reconcile with the sudden loss of it? These are the elements that transform a story from a mere report into a gripping narrative. Tension, uncertainty, and the human struggle to navigate the unexpected. Amid this, a quieter, almost hidden drama unfolded. Joshua's focus shifted from survival to consideration of the aftermath. What would the crash mean for his career? For his family? For his reputation? These are questions few think about in the immediate rush of rescue and medical intervention, but for someone like Joshua, they were unavoidable. Every moment following the crash became a test of resilience, not in the ring, but in the uncharted territory of fear, vulnerability, and consequence. And yet, even amid chaos, moments of clarity appeared. Security personnel ensured that Joshua and the surviving passenger were safe. Medics assessed, treated, and stabilized. Observers, although shaken, worked to maintain order. The human instinct to survive and protect emerged as a powerful counterbalance to the randomness of fate. Every action mattered, every decision had weight, and every second became a potential turning point. But perhaps the most haunting element of the day was not the crash itself, but its immediacy. One moment, life moved forward as usual. The next, everything was changed. A single miscalculation, a fraction of a second, and the trajectory of multiple lives shifted irrevocably. For Joshua, a man who had fought for survival in arenas filled with roaring crowds, this fight had no rules, no crowd, no opponent he could anticipate. It was a raw confrontation with mortality, and he faced it on equal footing with every other human being, vulnerable, uncertain, and profoundly exposed. By late morning, the initial shock began to settle into a heavier reality. Investigations would continue. Official statements would attempt to frame the narrative. Media coverage would intensify. But for Joshua, for his family, and for those involved, the emotional and psychological weight of the event was only beginning to register. The day had begun ordinary, yet it ended with uncertainty, fear, and a confrontation with life's starkest truths. And yet, despite all the chaos and pain, one thing was clear. The story of that day would not end with the crash. It was only the first chapter in a series of events that would reveal the limits of human control, the power of fate, and the raw vulnerability even a champion cannot escape. The journey from the wrecked SUV to recovery, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, had only just begun. They said it happened in a blink. 1 second the road was calm, the next chaos. These were the words of a roadside vendor who witnessed the crash that changed Anthony Joshua's life forever. Imagine seeing a vehicle, sleek and powerful, suddenly lose control, barreling toward a stationary truck. There's a moment of disbelief, a moment when your mind refuses to comprehend the impending impact, and then it's too late. That moment, fleeting and surreal, is where ordinary life intersects with catastrophe. Witnesses were some of the first to tell the unfiltered story of that morning. Drivers, pedestrians, bystanders, and even other motorists in the convoy all saw fragments of the crash, each perspective slightly different, each adding layers of complexity to the narrative. One motorist recalled, "I saw the SUV approaching fast, but it looked stable at first. Then, suddenly, it swerved. There was no way to avoid it." Another described a chaotic scene. "I heard the screech, then the smash. Glass flew everywhere, people were shouting. It felt like the world stopped." What's remarkable about eyewitness accounts is the contradiction inherent in them. Some say the SUV lost control while overtaking another vehicle. Others insist it was already swerving dangerously before the maneuver. These differences do not lessen the truth of the crash. They enhance it, painting a picture of confusion, split-second decisions, and human perception under extreme stress. And for Anthony Joshua, who had spent a lifetime controlling outcomes in the boxing ring, losing control in a public space like this must have been profoundly jarring. The vendor, who was one of the first on the scene, described seeing Joshua amidst the wreckage. He was sitting there, shirtless, looking dazed. You could see the fear in his eyes. He was alive, but different. Vulnerable. These details are crucial. In the ring, Joshua commands presence, strength, and authority. On the highway that morning, the raw vulnerability of a man confronted with mortality was on full display. His power, fame, and skill could not shield him from the randomness of the world. Security personnel also provided their own accounts, emphasizing both their training and their shock. Their role was to protect, to anticipate danger, and to maintain order, yet even they could not prevent the collision. One officer explained, "We were behind the SUV, following protocol. But sometimes, no matter how prepared you are, events unfold too fast." It was overwhelming. Their words underscore a central tension in the story. Preparation and vigilance can mitigate risk, but they cannot eliminate it entirely. Eyewitnesses also noted the behavior of the truck's driver. The stationary vehicle was reportedly parked legally, with hazard lights on, but its sudden presence became a lethal obstacle. One motorist said, "I don't think the truck did anything wrong. It was there, waiting, but the SUV came too fast. The timing was everything." This statement raises a deeper question about fate, chance, and human error. Could anyone have prevented this? Or was it a collision of circumstances that no one could control? Some witnesses noticed Joshua attempting to speak immediately after the crash. His words, fragmented but urgent, were a mix of fear, disbelief, and concern for the others in the vehicle. He kept looking around, trying to assess the damage, trying to help, said one onlooker. It was a man acting instinctively, yet every action was tinged with the helplessness of the situation. Even champions must confront moments when instincts alone cannot solve the problem. One striking account came from a passenger in a nearby vehicle who followed the convoy. They described a moment of surreal calm just before the impact. I remember seeing him, sitting there, looking out the window. It was as if he knew something was wrong, but I don't know if he could have done anything to prevent it. Then the crash happened. It was like watching someone fall in slow motion. This moment of eerie foresight, whether real or perceived, adds another layer of drama and suspense. Was Joshua aware of the impending danger? Did he feel the inevitability of what was about to occur? Witnesses also observed the immediate aftermath of the collision. People rushed to the SUV, breaking windows, helping the injured, and calling emergency services. The human instinct to respond to trauma, to assist, to comfort, to survive, was on full display. Bystanders who initially froze in shock quickly became actors in a life-and-death scene, their courage and quick thinking forming an invisible thread that connected Joshua to survival. Social media footage later corroborated some of these eyewitness accounts. Videos captured from multiple angles revealed both the chaos and the clarity of individual moments. Joshua dazed and shirtless, the twisted metal of the SUV, shards of glass scattered across the road, and bystanders assisting. The visual evidence provided a new layer to the narrative, one that both confirmed and contradicted verbal testimonies. It is in these contradictions that suspense and engagement thrive, keeping audiences glued to every detail. Even the minor details of the crash are significant. Witnesses described the way the SUV's tires skidded across the asphalt, the sparks emitted as metal scraped metal, and the sudden eruption of debris. These visual cues convey the violence of the impact in a way that numbers and reports cannot. It was not merely a collision. It was a sudden, explosive disruption of normalcy, a violent reminder of how fragile human life can be. But perhaps the most compelling testimonies came from those closest to Joshua during the crash. His companion in the SUV described the seconds leading up to impact with a clarity born of terror. "We were just talking," they said. Then the SUV jerked. "I remember the sound, the feeling of being thrown. It all happened so fast. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the end." Their perspective highlights an essential aspect of the story, the difference between perception and reality, between control and chaos. Even those prepared, even those experienced, were powerless against the forces at play. Medical responders, too, provided accounts that illuminate the severity of the crash. One paramedic stated, "He was conscious but clearly in shock. Minor injuries on paper, but the trauma was evident in his demeanor. The psychological shock was as significant as the physical impact." Joshua's ability to remain coherent under such circumstances reflects resilience, yet also underscores the severity of the situation. A man who had trained for battles in the ring now faced a fight for survival in an unpredictable, uncontrollable environment. Witnesses also recall the surreal detail. Joshua reportedly looked back at the wreckage of the SUV even as he was moved to safety. It was as if he was assessing not only his own condition but the broader reality of what had occurred, the people involved, the damage, the lives irreversibly changed. In that gaze, observers saw a mixture of fear, reflection, and a dawning understanding of mortality that few are privileged to witness. As hours passed, investigators began piecing together the narratives. The witnesses' testimonies were invaluable, yet their contradictions highlighted a central theme. Chaos is inherently subjective. Each individual perceives events differently, and in moments of high stress, memory can distort reality. These conflicting accounts created a tension between fact and perception, keeping both authorities and the public in suspense. And so the day unfolded, with witnesses providing fragmented, yet powerful accounts of the moment Anthony Joshua's world changed. Each perspective, each observation, adds depth to the story. The speed of the SUV, the suddenness of the impact, the reactions of the bystanders, the vulnerability of a champion. It is a mosaic of human experience, composed of terror, instinct, courage, and fragility. As the morning wore on, the puzzle of the crash began to take shape, piece by piece, through the voices of those who had seen it unfold. One of the most chilling accounts came from a commuter who had been stuck in traffic just behind the SUV. "I watched the vehicle approach, and something felt off," he recalled. "The driver seemed to overcorrect. The SUV swerved slightly, and then it happened. I don't think anyone could have stopped it." That simple observation encapsulates the tension of the moment. Ordinary actions, ordinary mistakes, transformed into extraordinary consequences in a fraction of a second. The witnesses were unanimous in one chilling detail. Anthony Joshua's calmness amid chaos was almost surreal. Despite the trauma, he appeared alert, scanning the scene, trying to understand what had just occurred. One onlooker described it like watching a fighter after a brutal exchange in the ring, bruised, battered, yet composed. But this was different. The arena was gone. The rules were gone. There was no bell, no corner, no referee. Just shattered metal, broken lives, and the cold reality of mortality. Security personnel who followed the convoy added another layer to the narrative. They described the moments after the impact, when instinct had to take over. "We ran toward the SUV, breaking the rear window to get to him," one officer said. "Even though he's a global figure, a human being is a human being. He was scared, but he stayed calm enough for us to move him safely." These testimonies highlight the paradox at the heart of the story. Even someone trained to be fearless, someone who has faced physical danger for a living, can become vulnerable in the face of a life-threatening accident. Bystanders also described the immediate aftermath with a mix of awe and horror. People rushed to help, some lifting Joshua from the wreckage, others assisting the second passenger, and still others trying to tend to the fallen victims. The scene was chaotic, a mixture of heroism and panic, courage and helplessness. One local man said, "We didn't know who he was at first, but when we saw him, we realized this is Anthony Joshua. And yet he's just a man, like the rest of us, in need of help." That recognition, seeing a global icon reduced to the vulnerability of any human, added emotional weight to every action taken by witnesses that morning. Perhaps most haunting were the eyewitness reports of Joshua's statements immediately after the crash. Some described him repeating the words, "I will not survive," while others suggested he was trying to reassure his companion. Whether spoken out of fear, shock, or raw honesty, these words became a focal point for speculation and concern. For a man who had faced countless threats in the ring, the declaration highlighted a truth that resonates universally. No amount of skill or fame can guarantee safety when fate intervenes. The complexity of witness accounts was further amplified by video evidence. Multiple clips emerged on social media, showing the SUV's approach, the moment of impact, and the chaotic aftermath. Each video offered a slightly different perspective, revealing contradictions and sparking debate. Was the SUV moving too fast, or was the truck partially in the lane? Did the driver react in time, or was it already too late? These questions, posed by viewers and analysts alike, kept the story alive and created an ongoing tension that would carry through the following days. Even minor details mattered. Witnesses recalled the way the SUV's tires screeched on the asphalt, how the vehicle tilted as it collided, and how the passengers were jostled violently. Each observation, though small, contributed to the larger narrative of chaos and unpredictability. In moments like these, reality is both magnified and fragmented. A combination of perception, memory, and instinct. And for Joshua, these tiny details became life-altering moments, turning a familiar commute into a near-fatal event. The reactions of those traveling in other vehicles were equally compelling. Commuters who had initially slowed to a halt described feeling frozen, watching events unfold with a mix of fear and fascination. Some helped immediately, while others called emergency services or filmed the scene, creating documentation that would later become a vital record. Each response reflected a human instinct to act, to observe, to intervene, to survive. Medical responders who arrived shortly after the crash provided another perspective on the impact. They emphasized the importance of immediate assessment, noting that while initial reports suggested minor injuries, the true picture was more complex. Shock, bruising, and hidden trauma could manifest hours later, they warned. Their words underscored the reality that appearances can be deceiving, and what seems minor in the moment may carry hidden consequences. Witness accounts also revealed tension in the convoy itself. Security personnel had to make split-second decisions, whether to stay with the SUV, assist Joshua, or manage the broader traffic situation. Their testimonies highlight a layer of human decision-making often overlooked in accident reports, the delicate balance between duty, instinct, and responsibility. Even the most experienced professionals were forced to navigate uncertainty, improvising in real time to protect lives. Amidst all the chaos, another narrative thread began to emerge: the psychological impact of the crash on Joshua. Witnesses noted his gaze, the way he surveyed the scene, and the intensity of his focus. One observer said, "He looked like he was trying to understand everything in one glance. The vehicle, the people, what had gone wrong." There was fear, yes, but also a determination to process it all. This reaction illustrates a critical theme: the mind's attempt to regain control when physical control has been lost. For someone whose career is built on precision and strategy, this psychological reckoning is both profound and revealing. And yet, for all the accounts collected, one truth remained. No witness could fully capture the experience of being inside the SUV, of feeling the impact, or of confronting the immediate aftermath. Only those present, Joshua, his passenger, and the security detail, could truly understand the intensity of the moment. For the rest of the world, their testimonies, coupled with video evidence, offered a glimpse, a tantalizing, suspenseful glimpse, into a harrowing event that was equal parts human drama and tragic accident. But as the day unfolded, new layers of complexity emerged. Investigators reviewed footage, interviewed witnesses again, and began to piece together the mechanics of the crash. Speed, timing, and the behavior of all vehicles involved were scrutinized. Contradictions in accounts were noted, and new questions arose. Could the crash have been avoided? Did external conditions play a role? And most importantly, what did Joshua himself perceive in those crucial seconds before impact? The witnesses' accounts, while detailed and revealing, only told part of the story. Behind the scenes, discussions about safety, human error, and accountability were already underway. Authorities examined not only the SUV and truck, but also the training, the protocols, and the decisions that led to the collision. Every witness added a brushstroke to the larger picture, and the accumulation of these perspectives created a sense of immediacy, tension, and emotional gravity. It was a narrative built not just on facts, but on human perception, emotion, and memory. And in the center of it all was Anthony Joshua, vulnerable, exposed, and confronting the fragility of life in a way no fight ever forced him to. The story, however, did not end with the witnesses' accounts. Their testimonies set the stage for the next chapter: the wreckage itself, the damage, the injuries, and the shocking realities that would confront Joshua and the world in the hours following the crash. The perspectives of those who saw it unfold were only the beginning. The next revelations would reveal the full magnitude of the tragedy, the fragility of life, and the unforeseen challenges that even a champion cannot avoid. The SUV lay twisted across the shoulder of the Lagos-Ibadan expressway like a metallic sculpture of chaos. Shattered glass glittered in the early sunlight, shards scattered across the asphalt like frozen rain. The sound of bending metal had faded, replaced by the low murmur of traffic slowed by curiosity, sirens wailing in the distance. But the scene itself told a story more powerful than any words could convey, a story of speed, collision, and raw vulnerability. Anthony Joshua sat amidst this chaos, shirtless, his chest rising and falling rapidly. His eyes scanned the twisted vehicle, the scattered debris, and the bystanders rushing toward him. To an observer, he seemed dazed, almost unreal, as if time had slowed for him while the world continued on. It was a stark contrast to the image the public holds of Joshua, the unshakable champion who commands arenas with his presence, power, and precision. Here, he was human, fragile, vulnerable. The wreckage itself was a study in violence and physics. The front end of the SUV had crumpled against the truck, the metal folded and twisted like tinfoil. The tires were bent, rims shattered, and the airbags deployed but ineffective against the sheer force of the impact. Witnesses later described it as like a car had been smashed by a hammer, and the imagery was apartment. This was no minor collision. It was a violent, life-altering moment that could have ended in total catastrophe. Inside the vehicle, the passenger compartment had fared better than the crumpled exterior might suggest, but only barely. The seats were askew, the interior filled with shards of glass, and the smell of gasoline permeated the air. The secondary passenger, though conscious, was visibly shaken. Every movement carried the risk of further injury, and the reality of the crash was immediate. Survival was never guaranteed. The human body, no matter how trained or conditioned, is fragile in the face of such force. Emergency responders arrived quickly, their efficiency a critical lifeline. Paramedics assessed the passengers, applied first aid, and prepared them for transport. Joshua, despite his fame, received the same careful attention as any other individual. But his condition was complicated. Minor injuries on paper could not capture the subtle internal trauma, the bruises forming beneath the skin, or the psychological shock of the event. Every gesture, every word, every breath mattered. In these first moments after the crash, life hung in delicate balance. The wreckage drew a crowd, as is common on busy highways in Lagos. Bystanders, drivers, and local residents gathered, some to help, others to witness. Among them, several began filming footage that would later circulate online, revealing the stark reality of the crash to millions around the world. These videos captured the surreal nature of the moment. Joshua seated amid twisted metal, glass embedded in his skin, and the chaos of human reaction all around. It was a raw, unfiltered view of vulnerability that no staged image could replicate. One particularly harrowing detail, noted by witnesses, was the positioning of the SUV against the truck. The front passenger side had absorbed the majority of the impact, leaving jagged metal pressing dangerously close to where Joshua sat in the rear. Experts later remarked that even slight shifts in seating or body position could have resulted in more severe injuries or death. The line between survival and catastrophe had been measured in inches, fractions of a second, a sobering reminder of life's fragility. Security personnel, despite their training, had to improvise. One officer described climbing over twisted metal to reach Joshua, carefully avoiding broken glass while ensuring the man remained conscious. It was surreal, he said. Here was a global icon, sitting there, vulnerable, human. Our training helped, but nothing could prepare you for that moment. Their intervention highlights a central theme of the story. Preparedness can mitigate risk, but cannot eliminate the randomness of fate. The secondary passenger's condition added another layer of tension. Conscious but shaken, they clung to awareness even as adrenaline coursed through their body. Witnesses described the two of them, Joshua and his companion, exchanging glances, trying to make sense of what had just occurred. Every second was fraught with risk, every movement carefully considered. In this moment, survival was a delicate dance between instinct and circumstance. Perhaps the most striking element of the wreckage was its visual symbolism. Here was a man who had dominated opponents with strength, agility, and strategy, reduced to a seated figure surrounded by chaos. The twisted metal, the broken glass, and the overturned sense of normalcy mirrored the internal disorientation Joshua must have felt. Champions in the ring often confront danger on their terms. Here, the danger arrived without warning, without rules, without fairness. Bystanders' accounts underscore this surreal juxtaposition. One woman recalled rushing to the SUV and seeing Joshua's eyes, wide, alert, and yet filled with a human vulnerability rarely seen. You could see the shock, the fear, but also a strange composure. He wasn't screaming, not at first. He was assessing, like a fighter, even out of the ring. This observation captures the duality of the moment, terror tempered by instinct, vulnerability balanced with resilience. Meanwhile, the SUV itself was examined by experts, who noted the extent of structural damage and the physics of the collision. The vehicle had absorbed the impact in ways that likely prevented more severe injuries. Safety mechanisms, such as airbags and reinforced frames, played a role, but so did the randomness of positioning and movement at the moment of impact. It was a brutal reminder that even the most advanced technology cannot completely mitigate the power of momentum and human error. The visual chaos of the wreckage was mirrored by the emotional chaos surrounding it. Family members were en route, emergency responders were coordinating care, and bystanders were grappling with the sudden intersection of ordinary life and extreme catastrophe. Every element contributed to a narrative of tension, suspense, and human vulnerability. And for Joshua, every passing minute in that wreckage amplified the psychological weight of the crash. The adrenaline that had once fueled victory in the ring now surged to keep him conscious, aware, and alive. Yet, for all the drama of the wreckage itself, there were smaller, quieter moments that carried immense significance. A passerby helped lift Joshua's arm to free it from twisted metal. Security officers ensured the secondary passenger remained upright. Paramedics checked vital signs with meticulous care. These microactions, small in isolation, collectively determined survival. They highlight a profound truth. In moments of crisis, human intervention, courage, and compassion can tip the balance between life and death. Even after being moved to a secondary vehicle, Joshua's condition remained tenuous. Shaken, dazed, and bleeding, he was transported to the hospital. The wreckage, now abandoned and cordoned off, stood as a silent testament to the events that had unfolded, a frozen moment of chaos, resilience, and raw humanity. But as the wreckage was cleared and investigations began, more questions surfaced. How exactly had the SUV lost control? Was speed a primary factor, or had road conditions contributed? Could better preparation, earlier warnings, or alternative decisions have prevented this disaster? And perhaps most hauntingly, what did Joshua himself remember about the moments inside the crumpled metal? These unanswered questions would drive the next phase of the story. A deeper exploration of his injuries, the fatalities, and the consequences that extended far beyond the highway. The wreckage was only the beginning, a physical representation of chaos, vulnerability, and human fragility. The aftermath of the wreckage was more than just metal and broken glass. It was a visceral reminder of how quickly life can pivot from normalcy to catastrophe. Traffic crawled around the scene, some drivers slowing to gawk, others stopping to help, their attention torn between curiosity and compassion. The road, which moments earlier had been routine, was now transformed into a tableau of chaos and human vulnerability. Anthony Joshua, despite his training, his strength, and his history of confronting danger, now faced a battle unlike any in the ring. The psychological weight of survival in those first hours was immense. Witnesses recalled seeing him repeatedly touch his bruises and cuts, assessing the damage with careful, almost mechanical gestures. Even in the haze of shock, he was calculating, a survival instinct kicking in, reminding him that consciousness itself was a prize. Emergency medical teams were meticulous in their efforts. Every movement, every decision mattered. One paramedic recalled, "We had to stabilize him, check for internal injuries, but also manage his psychological state." He was alert, but shock was evident. It's a different kind of fight, one with no rules, no opponent, and no round clock. This was a different arena altogether. The rules of boxing could not apply here. The opponent was chance itself, and every second was a round he could not control. Witnesses continued to provide critical details about the wreckage. One described how Joshua's body, though protected by the seatbelt, had jolted violently. You could see him shift, then pause, then shift again, the witness said. Every movement could have caused more injury. It was terrifying to watch. This physical reality, the vulnerability of the human body under such force, added depth to public understanding of what had transpired. Injuries that appeared minor externally could conceal deep trauma, bruising, or concussion. Security personnel worked tirelessly to maintain order at the scene. In addition to assisting Joshua and the passenger, they coordinated with emergency services, controlled onlookers, and ensured that evidence for the investigation remained intact. One officer described the surreal juxtaposition. Here we are, managing a global superstar, while 2 lives were lost, and the rest of us are trying to understand what happened. It's chaos, but it has to be managed. Their reflections highlight the complexity of real-world emergencies, where human lives, celebrity status, and legal investigations intersect in high-stakes ways. Even the bystanders' reactions were telling. Some had rushed instinctively to help, while others documented the crash on their phones. Videos captured Joshua's initial state, dazed, shirtless, surveying the wreckage, alongside the frenzied efforts of others. Social media amplified these images instantly, turning the local tragedy into a global event within hours. Millions around the world would witness the same scenes, each frame carrying emotional weight: fear, empathy, admiration, and disbelief. The vehicle itself remained a focal point for investigators. Experts noted the SUV's reinforced frame had likely prevented more severe injuries, while airbags and safety mechanisms had deployed as intended. Yet, the sheer force of the collision, estimated to be high given the reported speed, exposed the limitations of technology when combined with human error and unpredictable circumstances. Every dent, every bent panel, every shard of glass told a story of violence and chance intertwined. Family members, meanwhile, were caught in a storm of fear and uncertainty. Joshua's mother, father, and brother rushed toward the hospital, grappling with their own emotional response to what had occurred. Their journey, filled with anxious calls, frantic messages, and mounting dread, mirrored the chaos of the scene itself. Their presence highlighted a poignant truth. Behind every public figure is a private network of people whose lives are just as dramatically impacted by moments of crisis. Medical assessments confirmed the dual reality: visible injuries that could be treated immediately, and hidden trauma that required careful monitoring. Paramedics and doctors noted signs of shock, minor lacerations, and bruising, but the potential for internal complications loomed. Even a champion's body, trained for extreme physical punishment, is vulnerable to the forces of a high-speed collision. The wreckage had transformed his perception of safety, control, and mortality in a way no previous fight ever could. Public fascination with the wreckage extended beyond Joshua himself. Discussions circulated online and in newsrooms. Was speed the primary factor? Did road conditions contribute? Could the stationary truck have been avoided? Experts, pundits, and fans analyzed every aspect, creating a layer of suspense and speculation that only deepened the story's emotional resonance. Every detail, however minor, was dissected, debated, and sensationalized, feeding the global audience's need for understanding and closure. Amidst the chaos, Joshua remained a study in contrast. Vulnerable yet composed, dazed yet alert, a man confronting mortality with instincts honed over years of combat. Witnesses noted the intensity of his gaze, the subtle movements as he assessed his own condition, and the occasional glance toward the secondary passenger, an almost protective gesture amidst the wreckage. It was a moment that humanized him profoundly, bridging the gap between a global icon and the universal experience of fear. Investigators began to document the scene meticulously. Every skid mark, every dent, every shard of glass was photographed and logged. Yet, even in this controlled environment, ambiguity remained. Conflicting accounts from witnesses, varying perspectives on speed and positioning, and the natural distortions of memory made it difficult to reconstruct the event with absolute certainty. These contradictions added tension, prolonging suspense and leaving the world guessing about the exact sequence of events that brought Joshua to the brink. And yet, as the wreckage was finally cleared, one truth was undeniable: Anthony Joshua had survived a near-catastrophic event. The twisted SUV, the shattered glass, the chaotic roadway, all of it stood as testimony to a moment where fate, physics, and human fragility collided. But survival was only the beginning. The physical injuries, the psychological impact, and the broader consequences of the crash were just beginning to unfold. As the sun climbed higher over Lagos, the wreckage was towed away, leaving behind only a scar on the asphalt and a story that would continue to captivate the world. Anthony Joshua had emerged from the immediate danger, but the questions remained. How serious were his injuries? How would this event shape his career and life moving forward? And what unseen consequences would manifest in the hours and days to come? "I can't believe this is happening," whispered a nurse to a colleague as Anthony Joshua was wheeled into the hospital emergency department. For a man whose life had been defined by the precision of punches, the calculation of every movement, and the control of his body, the aftermath of the crash was an entirely different fight. Here, the opponent was invisible: internal trauma, the shock coursing through his system, and the uncertainty of how badly he was hurt. Joshua had survived the impact, but survival is often just the first round in the fight that follows a serious accident. Medical staff quickly assessed his vital signs: pulse elevated, breathing rapid, skin showing minor abrasions and contusions. But beneath the surface, there were injuries that could not be seen with the naked eye. Internal bruising, possible concussions, and trauma to soft tissues are common in high-speed collisions, and even a trained athlete is not immune. The human body, no matter how conditioned, has limits, and Joshua had just pushed them to the extreme. Initial reports suggested minor injuries, a phrase repeated in official statements and media coverage. But those who saw him up close knew the truth was more complicated. Cuts on his arms and face, punctures from broken glass, and bruising across the torso were evident. More concerning were the signs of internal impact. The subtle way he shifted his weight, winced when moving, and paused before taking a deep breath. Every reaction told a story of hidden pain. Doctors conducted imaging scans, X-rays, CT scans, and ultrasounds, trying to quantify the invisible damage. What they found was sobering. While no bones were broken, there were significant internal contusions, especially around the ribs and torso. The kind of injuries that, if ignored or mismanaged, could escalate into serious complications. A fractured rib could puncture a lung. Internal bleeding could worsen overnight. Every hour mattered. One of the attending physicians described the situation. Physically, he could have walked out if treated superficially, but internally, the trauma was extensive. We had to monitor him carefully, ensure nothing worsened. It's a dangerous combination, outwardly appearing okay, but with hidden injuries that can be life-threatening. This duality, external strength masking internal vulnerability, mirrored Joshua's own life story. A man who projects invincibility but is ultimately human. Witnesses at the hospital recounted seeing Joshua seated upright, speaking to staff, yet every gesture was calculated, careful. He flinched when nurses checked his abdomen, tensed when someone moved his arm, and occasionally closed his eyes, letting out a sharp breath. These small but telling reactions painted a vivid picture of the invisible battle raging within him. Even champions are not immune to pain, and the body's memory of trauma is often relentless. The secondary passenger also received treatment, though their injuries were less severe. Yet the psychological impact was just as significant. Witnesses noted that Joshua, even in his own state of pain, remained conscious of the companion's condition. He asked questions, offered reassurance, and maintained situational awareness, a reflection of his lifelong discipline in high-pressure scenarios. His empathy amidst personal trauma revealed a side rarely visible to the public, a man who balances strength with awareness of others' vulnerability. Social media exploded with images of Joshua post-crash, fueling concern and speculation. Fans around the world debated the severity of his injuries. Was he truly okay? Was this a minor accident, or had he narrowly escaped a fatal event? The contrast between official statements and the visible evidence in videos heightened tension. Every bruise,